when my daughter called, demanding the penthouse keys for her secret honeymoon. I smiled and said, "Of course, darling, the code is 2847. What she didn't know was that I'd just changed every single lock, installed new security cameras, and her new husband's biggest nightmare was waiting inside that elevator. My name is Rosalind Sterling. I'm 58 years old, and I've spent the last 3 decades building something extraordinary from absolutely nothing. When people see my penthouse overlooking Central Park, they assume I inherited wealth or married into it. The truth is messier and far more satisfying than that assumption. 28 years ago, I was a single mother working 16-hour days as a junior architect, while my ex-husband ran off with his dental hygienist to start fresh in Miami. He left behind exactly 3 things: unpaid credit card bills, a daughter who'd just turned 2, and a Post-it note stuck to our refrigerator that read, "This isn't what I signed up for." The note stayed on that refrigerator for exactly 1 week before I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, along with every other reminder of his existence. Delphine, my daughter, grew up thinking her father died in a car accident because some lies protect children better than truth ever could. She had my dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, but thankfully, none of his cowardice. From the moment she could walk, that little girl had music flowing through her veins like most people have blood. By age 5, she was composing simple melodies on our secondhand piano. By 15, she was performing at coffee shops around Manhattan, earning enough to pay for her own sheet music and piano lessons. The penthouse came after years of 18-hour workdays, missed meals, and designs that other architects called impossible until I proved them wrong. When I finally signed the papers for the 42nd floor corner unit with wraparound terraces, Delphine was 23 and already making a name for herself in the classical music world. She hugged me so tight that day I thought my ribs might crack, and whispered, "Mom, one day I'm going to get married on our rooftop garden with the whole city watching." That memory feels like it belongs to someone else's life now. The first time Delphine brought Cassius Vale home for dinner, I spent 47 minutes preparing herb-crusted salmon and roasted vegetables while she paced around my kitchen island like a caged animal. "Mom, he's different," she kept saying, adjusting the wine glasses for the 3rd time. "He really understands my music in ways other people don't." The way she said it made my architect's brain start cataloging structural problems before I'd even met the man. Cassius arrived at exactly 7:30, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He carried white orchids instead of roses, kissed my hand instead of offering a handshake, and complimented the architectural details of my foyer with vocabulary that suggested either extensive education or careful research. "Ms. Sterling, Delphine has told me so much about your incredible journey from struggling single mother to one of Manhattan's most respected architects. This penthouse is absolutely breathtaking." The comment should have felt flattering, but something about his phrasing made my skin crawl. Struggling single mother, as if my past defined my present capabilities. As if my success story was more interesting to him than my actual achievements. I watched him catalog every piece of furniture, every artwork, every detail of my home with eyes that moved like a real estate appraiser, rather than someone trying to impress his girlfriend's mother. During dinner, he asked thoughtful questions about my most famous building designs and seemed genuinely fascinated by the engineering challenges I'd overcome. But he also mentioned my penthouse's estimated value 3 separate times, asked about my insurance coverage twice, and wondered aloud about the security measures for a building with such wealthy residents. When Delphine left to retrieve dessert from the kitchen, he leaned forward conspiratorially and said, "You must be so proud of everything you've built here. Delphine is incredibly fortunate to have such a successful mother and such a valuable inheritance waiting for her future." Inheritance. The word hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. I'm not planning to die anytime soon. Cassius? I replied, keeping my voice level while my instincts screamed warnings. And Delphine has built her own successful career. She doesn't need to wait around for anyone's inheritance. He laughed, a sound that seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Of course not. I just meant that family security must bring such peace of mind. Delphine mentioned this place has been featured in Architectural Digest twice. The historical significance alone must make it incredibly valuable. When Delphine returned with her homemade tiramisu, glowing with happiness at seeing her boyfriend and mother getting along so well, I decided to file my concerns under overprotective mother syndrome and give Cassius the benefit of the doubt. That decision would haunt me for the next 2 years. Over the following months, I watched my daughter's life slowly reorganize itself around Cassius's preferences with the precision of a military operation. Her weekly coffee dates with college friends became monthly, then quarterly, then disappeared entirely because Cassius thinks my energy is better invested in our relationship and my music career. Her Tuesday night calls to me became Wednesday night texts, then occasional Saturday morning check-ins that felt more obligatory than organic. Mom, Cassius has been doing some reading about codependent family relationships, Delphine explained during one of our increasingly rare conversations. He thinks I've been using you as emotional support in ways that might prevent me from developing proper coping mechanisms as an adult. He's helping me become more independent and self-reliant. Independent and self-reliant. 2 qualities I'd spent 26 years instilling in my daughter, now being weaponized against our relationship by a man who'd known her for 8 months. But Delphine seemed happier than I'd seen her since her early 20s. So I swallowed my objections and told myself that healthy boundaries were probably good for both of us. The engagement announcement came via Instagram on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing blueprints for a new community center in Brooklyn. The photo showed Delphine's left hand adorned with a diamond that could have funded a small orchestra for a year, positioned artfully next to a bottle of champagne that cost more than most musicians earned in a month. The caption read, "He asked. I said yes. Sometimes love finds you when you least expect it and changes everything." 43 likes and counting. Comments from friends and colleagues congratulating her. Not a single person asking where her mother was because most of them probably assumed I already knew. I stared at that photo until my coffee grew cold and my assistant knocked on my office door to remind me about my 11 o'clock meeting. When I called Delphine 20 minutes later, her voice bubbled with excitement and champagne-fueled euphoria. "Mom, I'm so sorry you had to find out through social media. It happened so fast. And we were celebrating with Cassius's parents, and then we went back to his apartment and called his business associates. And by the time I thought to call you, it was past midnight, and I didn't want to wake you up." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I managed, forcing warmth into my voice while my heart performed complicated acrobatics in my chest. "Tell me everything." She did, for 37 minutes. She described the proposal at a private dining room in the plaza. The 3-carat cushion-cut diamond, how romantic Cassius had been, how his parents immediately started planning an engagement party at their country club in Connecticut, how they were thinking about a spring wedding at a vineyard in Napa Valley. His mother already has connections with the most exclusive wedding planners, Delphine gushed. She says Cassius deserves nothing but perfection for his special day. His special day. Not their special day. His. "When's the engagement party?" I asked, already mentally clearing my calendar for the next few weekends. A pause that lasted 3 heartbeats too long. "Next Saturday evening. It's going to be intimate. Just immediate family and close friends. Should I plan to drive up Friday night or Saturday morning?" Another pause. Longer this time, filled with the sound of Delphine's breathing and what might have been Cassius's voice in the background. "Mom, about that. Cassius's family has very specific traditions around engagement celebrations. His mother has planned everything according to their customs, and they've requested that it remain just family members who've known Cassius since childhood. The words hit me like cold water. What does that mean exactly? Delphine, it means, well, it's really just for Cassius's side of the family and their longtime family friends. It's not that you're not important to us. It's just that his family has these traditional ways of doing things, and Cassius thinks it's important to respect their wishes since they're hosting. Cassius thinks. Everything had become about what Cassius thinks, what Cassius believes, what Cassius needs. My daughter had spent 24 years making her own decisions with confidence and intelligence. But suddenly, she was deferring to a man who'd been in her life for less than a year. I see, I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. And what do you think about this tradition? I think Cassius knows his family better than I do, and I want to start our marriage off on the right foot with them. You understand, right? We'll celebrate together soon. Just the three of us. That celebration never happened. In fact, over the next 18 months, I saw Cassius exactly 4 times, and each encounter felt more distant than the last. He was polite, but formal, treating me like Delphine's elderly aunt rather than the mother who'd raised her alone through teenagers' tantrums, college applications, and every significant moment of her life. The wedding planning happened around me rather than with me, like I was a piece of furniture that conversations flowed past rather than through. Delphine would mention details in passing during our increasingly infrequent phone calls. They'd found a venue in Napa Valley, booked a photographer who specialized in luxury weddings, chosen flowers that would complement the vineyard's natural landscape. But when I offered to help with planning, or asked about specific arrangements, I received vague responses about how Cassius was handling most of the logistics through his business connections. When exactly is the wedding? I asked during a brief call in March. I need to request time off work and book flights. We're thinking the first weekend in April, Delphine said. Cassius is finalizing details with the venue coordinator. The weather should be perfect then. That sounds wonderful. April in Napa Valley is beautiful. Will you need help with any of the planning? I could arrange flowers or help coordinate with vendors? Oh, Mom, that's sweet. But Cassius prefers to work with vendors who understand his vision for the event. He has very specific ideas about elegance and sophistication. But I'll definitely keep you updated as things develop. Elegance and sophistication. As if my architectural eye for design and 3 decades of coordinating complex projects somehow lacked the refinement necessary for my own daughter's wedding. The guest list remained a mystery. The dress shopping happened without me. The venue tours occurred while I was deliberately not invited. Every milestone that should have included me became a private affair between Delphine and Cassius's family. I was becoming a spectator in my own daughter's life, watching from the sidelines while someone else directed the most important scenes. The final blow came on a Thursday evening in late March, while I was reviewing architectural plans in my home office. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m., and Delphine's name appeared on my screen like a lifeline I didn't know I'd been drowning without. Mom, I need to talk to you about something important, and I need you to listen with an open mind. Nothing good ever followed that particular phrase. But I set down my pencil and gave her my complete attention. What is it, sweetheart? Cassius has been doing extensive research about family dynamics and healthy relationship boundaries. He's discovered some concerning patterns in my behavior that could potentially damage our marriage if we don't address them proactively. I felt ice form in my stomach. What kind of patterns? Well, he's pointed out that I have a tendency to call you whenever I'm stressed or upset instead of working through problems with my partner. He thinks this creates an unhealthy dependency that prevents me from developing proper emotional intimacy with my husband. He's shown me articles about women who prioritize their mothers over their spouses and how that destroys marriages. Every word felt like a carefully placed arrow aimed at the foundation of our relationship. Delphine, Calling your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal. It's what families do. But is it really normal? Mom Cassius has made me realize that most successful women my age have much more independent relationships with their parents. He thinks our dynamic might be preventing me from becoming the wife he deserves. The wife he deserves. Not the woman she wanted to become. Not the partner she chose to be. The wife he deserves. What does this mean practically? I asked, though I already suspected the answer would carve pieces from my heart. It means we need to establish healthier boundaries, less frequent contact, more space for Cassius and me to build our own traditions without outside influence. And she hesitated, and I heard Cassius's voice murmuring in the background. Cassius thinks it would be beneficial if we spent holidays with his family this year, just to break the pattern of dependence on you. The holidays. Every Christmas since her father left. Delphine and I had maintained our tradition of staying in pajamas until noon, drinking hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows, and opening presents like she was still 8 years old. It was our time, our ritual, our way of creating family from just the two of us. I see, I managed. Anything else? Actually, yes, Cassius is concerned about the penthouse situation. My blood turned to ice water. What about the penthouse? Well, you know I've always assumed I'd inherit it eventually. But Cassius has pointed out that this assumption creates an unhealthy power dynamic in our relationship. He feels like he can never truly relax in your home because it's not really ours. It's yours. And if something ever happened between you and me, we'd lose our connection to this beautiful space. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Are you asking me to sign the penthouse over to you? Not exactly. Cassius thinks it would be healthier if we established our own home base. Somewhere that belongs entirely to us, without any emotional strings attached. He wants us to have our own special place where he doesn't feel like he's constantly being evaluated by you. Constantly being evaluated. As if the few times I'd seen him in the past year constituted some kind of surveillance operation. As if my home, which I'd built with my own hands and filled with my own dreams, was somehow a threat to their relationship rather than a gift I'd hoped to share. Delphine, that penthouse represents 30 years of my life. It's where you learned to play piano, where we've celebrated every important moment since you were 23. It's filled with our memories. I know, Mom, and I treasure those memories. But I'm building a new life now with Cassius, and he needs to feel like we have our own space, our own traditions, our own special places, our own special places. Places that didn't include me. I ended that conversation with promises to think about everything she'd said and respect their need for independence. But privately, I started making plans of my own. Not revenge plans, not sabotage. But I decided it was time to learn more about the man who'd convinced my brilliant, independent daughter that loving her mother was a character flaw that needed correction. It took me exactly 1 week of careful internet searches and 3 phone calls to Delphine's college friends to piece together the first threads of Cassius Vale's real story. My daughter wasn't his first wealthy, talented girlfriend. There had been others. Isabella Reyes, whose family owned a successful chain of boutique hotels throughout California. She'd also been gradually isolated from her support system before their relationship ended abruptly when her father hired a private investigator and discovered Cassius's hidden debts. Before Isabella, there was Natasha Kim, whose trust fund from her late grandmother had mysteriously drained by $30,000 during her 8-month relationship with Cassius before her brothers intervened. Cassius Vale wasn't just controlling and manipulative. He was a predator who specialized in successful, creative women with family money and limited dating experience. He found targets who were emotionally generous, professionally accomplished, and financially valuable. My daughter, with her musical talent, trusting nature, and expectation of inheriting a multi-million-dollar penthouse, represented his most ambitious project yet. That's when I called my old friend Maxime Torres, a private investigator who'd helped me verify contractor credentials for some of my larger projects. Within 72 hours, Maxim had uncovered enough information about Cassius to fill a manila folder that would change everything. But I never got the chance to share those discoveries with Delphine because on April 3rd, at 9:27 in the morning, my daughter called with news that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Mom, I'm calling to let you know that Cassius and I got married yesterday afternoon." The words echoed in my head like sounds from underwater. "Yesterday, but I thought the wedding was planned for later this month." We decided to do something more intimate and spontaneous. Cassius felt like a big wedding was too commercial. Too much pressure on what should be a private moment between two people who love each other. We found a beautiful venue in Napa Valley and kept the ceremony small and meaningful. Small and meaningful. Code words for secret and exclusive. "Who was there?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would exclude me. "Cassius's parents and his sister from California. My friend Rebecca served as maid of honor. And Cassius's business partner Thomas was his best man." The photographer captured some incredible shots of the ceremony. It was absolutely perfect. Exactly what we both wanted. Perfect. A wedding without the mother who'd raised her. Planned by a man who'd convinced her that family was a burden rather than a blessing. "Congratulations," I said, because what else could I possibly say? "I'm sure it was beautiful. Thank you, Mom. And actually, there's something else. Cassius and I were hoping you could give us access to the penthouse for our honeymoon week. We'd love to spend our first days as a married couple in that beautiful space. And Cassius is particularly excited to experience the home that means so much to me." There it was, the real reason for the call. Not to share her joy with the woman who'd sacrificed everything to give her the life she'd built. Not to include me in the happiness of her new marriage. But to ask for the keys to the most valuable thing I owned. "The penthouse," I repeated slowly. "Right. Cassius has always been fascinated by your architectural achievement, and he thinks it would be romantic to start our marriage in such a meaningful place. Plus, he's interested in learning more about the building's history and your renovation process. He's particularly curious about the insurance valuations and security features." Insurance valuations and security features. How romantic indeed. "When would you need access?" I asked. "We're driving up from the vineyard this Friday evening. We'd love to have the whole weekend and maybe through next Wednesday to really settle in and enjoy the space." 5 days. They wanted 5 days in my sanctuary. My refuge. My life's greatest achievement. While I waited somewhere else like a displaced person in my own city. "Of course, darling," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions tearing through my chest. "I'll make sure everything is ready for you. The door code is 2D847, same as always." "Thank you so much, Mom. This means the world to us. Cassius is going to be thrilled." After I hung up, I sat in my office for exactly 15 minutes, staring at the Manhattan skyline and thinking about patterns. Cassius Vale followed patterns. He identified targets, isolated them from their support systems, gained access to their assets, and then moved on when the situation became complicated or when someone started asking questions. But Cassius had made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed I was just another helpless mother who would quietly accept being erased from her daughter's life. He'd underestimated what happens when someone tries to steal the most precious thing you've ever created. I spent the rest of that day making very specific preparations for my daughter's honeymoon. By evening, I had everything I needed to give Cassius Vale exactly what he deserved. Not revenge, really. Justice, and the kind of wedding gift that would reveal truths he'd spent 2 years trying to hide. Because sometimes, the best gifts are the ones that change everything forever. Friday evening arrived with the kind of Manhattan twilight that makes penthouse living feel like floating above the world. I stood at my floor-to-ceiling windows, watching traffic crawl through Central Park as I made final adjustments to the welcome package I'd prepared for my daughter's honeymoon. The locksmith had finished his work that morning, installing biometric scanners that would recognize only my fingerprints. The security company had positioned discrete cameras in the common areas, triggered by motion and sound. But the real centerpiece of my preparation sat on the master bedroom nightstand, a leather portfolio tied with black ribbon, containing everything Maxime Torres had discovered about Cassius Vale's carefully constructed life. At 7:43 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Delphine. "Just arrived at the building. Thank you so much for this. Mom, Cassius is overwhelmed by your generosity." I smiled, pouring myself a glass of wine while settling into my temporary suite at the plaza. Let them be overwhelmed. The first call came at 9:15 p.m. Delphine's number. But Cassius's voice, and he was shouting. "What the hell is wrong with you? You manipulative witch! How dare you violate our privacy with this garbage?" I set down my wine glass carefully, savoring the panic in his voice. "Hello, Cassius. I take it you found your wedding gift." "This isn't a gift. This is harassment. These documents are private, and you had no right to obtain them. I'm calling the police." "By all means, dear. I'm sure they'll be fascinated to hear about those outstanding warrants from Nevada. Did you mention those to Delphine during your courtship, or did that slip your mind?" In the background, I could hear Delphine crying, her voice muffled, but clearly distressed. Papers rustling, the sound of someone pacing across hardwood floors. "You're trying to destroy my marriage because you can't stand seeing your daughter happy," Cassius snarled. "This is pathetic, even for a bitter old woman who drove away her own husband." The insult bounced off me like rain on glass. "Cassius, I'm curious. Did you tell Delphine about the $297,000 you currently owe to various creditors, or the fact that your business address is a mailbox in Queens? I'm particularly interested in whether you mentioned the restraining order from your previous girlfriend's family." The line went quiet except for Delphine's sobbing. "I also included some interesting documentation about your childhood, which I'm sure you'll find emotionally triggering. Foster care records can be quite detailed when you know where to look." "Stop," he whispered, and for the first time since I'd known him. Cassius sounded vulnerable rather than calculating. "Please stop. The truth about your past doesn't make you evil, Cassius, but lying about it to manipulate my daughter does." Delphine's voice came closer to the phone. "Mom, what foster care records? Cassius told me his parents died when he was 12 and he lived with his wealthy aunt in Connecticut." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I was about to destroy. "Sweetheart, Cassius was placed in foster care at age 8 after his parents overdosed on heroin in a motel room in Detroit. He spent the next 10 years bouncing between 14 different homes, 3 of which were investigated for abuse. He aged out of the system at 18 with no family, no money, and no legitimate way to survive." The silence that followed lasted so long, I wondered if they'd hung up. Finally, Delphine spoke, her voice small and broken. "Is that true?" More silence, then Cassius, barely audible, "Yes." "But why would you lie about something like that? Why wouldn't you trust me with the truth?" "Because," Cassius said, and his voice cracked like a teenager's. "Because every time I've ever told anyone the truth about where I came from, they've looked at me like I was damaged goods, like I was something broken that might contaminate their perfect life." I found myself gripping the phone tighter, my carefully planned revenge suddenly feeling more complicated than I'd anticipated. "Cassius," Delphine whispered, "I would never have judged you for your childhood. I fell in love with who you are now, not where you came from." "No, you didn't," he replied with devastating honesty. "You fell in love with who I pretended to be, the successful businessman with family connections and inherited wealth. The man who could match your sophistication and your mother's achievements. But that person doesn't exist. I'm just a foster kid who learned to lie because the truth never got me anywhere." Through the phone, I could hear them both crying now, and something inside my chest began to crack. The debt collectors, I said quietly. How much time do you have before they escalate? Another long pause.
Maybe 2 weeks,
Cassius admitted.
They've already made it clear that Delphine's safety might become part of the equation if I don't pay soon.
The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Cassius hadn't just targeted my daughter for her money. He'd married her because desperate people make desperate choices, and men with gambling debts to dangerous creditors don't have the luxury of honest relationships.
Mom,
Delphine said, her voice stronger now. There's something else. Cassius told me about his plan after you left us the keys. He was going to stage a break-in next week, steal some of your art collection, and sell it to pay off the debts. He thought if it looked like a random burglary, you'd never suspect him. My blood went cold.
you were going to steal from me.
Yes, Cassius said simply. And I was going to let Delphine believe it was a coincidence. I was going to comfort her while she grieved for your violated space. And I was going to use her trust to cover my tracks, because that's what people like me do. We survive by taking from people who have more than we do. The honesty was brutal and somehow made everything worse. I don't want to be that person anymore, he continued, his voice breaking completely. But I don't know how to be anyone else. This is the only way I've ever known how to stay alive. I sat in my hotel room, staring at the city lights and feeling the weight of a decision I'd never expected to face. Cassius Vale was everything I'd suspected: a liar, a manipulator, a thief. But he was also a broken child who'd learned to survive in a world that had never given him safety or love. And my daughter, brilliant and compassionate as she was, loved him anyway. The debts, I said finally. How much exactly do you owe? $297,000, Cassius replied, plus interest that accrues daily. And if it were paid off completely, you'd be free to start over.
Yes, but Rosalind, I can't ask you to...
You're not asking. I'm deciding. I took a deep breath, thinking about the conversation that would change all of our lives. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to pay off your debts, all of them, in exchange. You're going to do 3 things. The line went completely silent. First, you're going to get a legitimate job and pay me back $50 a week for the rest of your life if necessary. I don't care if it takes 40 years. Second, you're going to enter therapy to deal with your childhood trauma and learn healthier ways to build relationships. And third, you're going to have your marriage to my daughter annulled immediately. Mom, no, Delphine protested. I know he lied, but you can't build a real relationship on a foundation of lies. Sweetheart, if Cassius genuinely loves you and wants to earn your trust, he'll understand why you need to start over honestly. 6 months later, I sat on my penthouse terrace watching Delphine and Cassius have coffee together at a small table near the railing. He looked different now, thinner, more tired, but somehow more real. The expensive suits had been replaced with simple clothes that matched his security guard's salary at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The practiced charm had given way to awkward honesty that made him seem younger and more genuine. They were dating again, carefully and slowly, building something new from the ruins of what had been destroyed. Cassius attended therapy twice a week and had never missed a $50 payment toward his debt. Delphine had moved back into the penthouse temporarily while deciding whether trust could be rebuilt or if some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. I was proud of them both for choosing the harder path. But on this particular afternoon, as I watched them navigate their careful reconciliation, my phone rang with a call that would shatter our fragile peace.
Ms. Sterling.
This is Dr. Helena Vasquez from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about a patient who was brought in earlier today. She claims to be Cassius Vale's biological sister, and she insisted I contact you specifically. My blood turned to ice. His sister Cassius doesn't have any family. That's what makes this so concerning.
The patient was found unconscious in an alley with severe injuries, consistent with a professional beating. Before she lost consciousness, she kept repeating your daughter's name and saying something about artwork and stolen identities. Ms. Sterling, I think your family might be in immediate danger. Through my window, I watched Cassius reach across the table to touch Delphine's hand, both of them laughing at something he'd said. They looked like any young couple working through their problems, completely unaware that the past Cassius thought he'd escaped was about to destroy everything we'd built together. What did she tell you exactly? I asked, my voice steady despite the terror flooding my veins. She said Cassius's real name isn't Cassius Vale. She said he's been using stolen identities for years, and the people he owes money to aren't just creditors. They're international art thieves who've been using him to identify wealthy targets. And Ms. Sterling, she said they've been watching your penthouse for months. I hung up the phone and stared at my daughter and the man she loved, knowing that everything I thought I'd fixed was about to explode in ways I'd never imagined. Because sometimes, the truth you think you've uncovered is just the first layer of a lie so complex that saving the people you love requires sacrifices you never thought you'd have to make. I watched my daughter laugh with a man whose real name I apparently didn't even know, and felt the weight of impossible choices settling on my shoulders like lead. Every instinct screamed at me to run down to the terrace and pull Delphine away from him immediately. But Dr. Vasquez's words echoed in my mind. They've been watching your penthouse for months. If Cassius's handlers were already surveilling us, sudden changes in behavior might trigger something far worse than the careful game we'd been playing. Instead, I called Maxim Torres. I need you here now, I said without preamble when he answered. And bring whatever security equipment you can carry.
Rosalind, what's happening?
The Cassius situation just became exponentially more complicated. I kept my voice low while moving away from the window. Apparently, he's been working with international art thieves, and they've been using our reconciliation as cover to case my collection. Maxim's silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. I'm 20 minutes away. Don't do anything until I get there. But 20 minutes felt like 20 hours as I watched Cassius and Delphine finish their coffee and move inside the penthouse. Through the glass doors, I could see him gesturing toward my Picasso sketches with what looked like casual appreciation, but now seemed like professional assessment. Every comment he'd ever made about my art collection suddenly took on sinister new meaning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your daughter's boyfriend has been lying about more than his childhood. Meet me at St. Mary's Hospital, room 314. Come alone, or everyone you love dies tonight. Evangeline Vale. Evangeline Vale, the sister who supposedly didn't exist. I stared at the message until my eyes watered, trying to process the magnitude of the trap we'd all walked into. If Cassius had been feeding information about my collection to criminals for months, then paying off his debts hadn't saved us. It had only bought time while they planned something bigger. The hospital was a 15-minute cab ride that felt like descending into hell. Room 314 contained a woman who looked like a female version of Cassius. If Cassius had been beaten with brass knuckles and left for dead, her left eye was swollen shut, her lips split, and her right arm was in a cast. But her remaining eye burned with intelligence that reminded me painfully of my daughter's determination. You're Rosalind Sterling, she said without introduction. The woman who paid my brother's debts and probably saved his life, at least temporarily. Your brother told us he had no family. Evangeline laughed, a sound like broken glass. My brother tells everyone what they need to hear to survive. It's what I taught him when we were kids, getting passed between foster homes like unwanted furniture. The difference is that I grew up and found legitimate ways to use those skills. He never did. She shifted carefully in her hospital bed, wincing with obvious pain. 3 days ago, I discovered that the art authentication company I work for has been using information Cassius provided about wealthy collectors. They've been planning a coordinated theft operation targeting 5 penthouses in Manhattan, including yours.
My blood went cold. Authentication company.
Meridian Fine Arts. We specialize in insurance appraisals and provenance verification for high-end collectors. I've been working there for 2 years, completely unaware that my supervisor had connected with my brother through his gambling contacts. They've been using my legitimate access to collector information and his romantic access to specific targets. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. That's why he was so interested in my insurance valuations and security systems.
Exactly. And why he pushed so hard to marry your daughter quickly. A spouse has legal access to property in ways that boyfriends don't. Evangeline's voice dropped to a whisper. But here's what you need to understand. I'm not the only one who discovered the connection. The other collectors they've targeted have started asking questions. My supervisor knows I'm a liability now.
She gestured to her bruised face. This was their warning. The next step is elimination.
Why are you telling me this instead of going to the police?
Because the police can't protect your daughter from these people, and they definitely can't protect my brother. But you might be able to. Evangeline leaned forward despite her obvious pain.
Cassius doesn't know about my job or the larger operation. He thinks he was just providing casual information to pay off gambling debts. If we move carefully, we can expose the whole network while keeping him and Delphine safe.
What do you need from me? Access to your penthouse tonight. They're planning to move tomorrow evening during a charity gala they know you'll be attending. If we can document their break-in attempt and trace their communication networks, we can bring down the entire operation. I stared at this broken woman who shared Cassius's eyes and Delphine's fierce determination, and realized that saving my daughter meant trusting a stranger whose brother had already betrayed us once. There's something else, Evangeline said quietly. Cassius's real name is Marcus Delacroix. Our parents weren't drug addicts who overdosed. They were art forgers who were murdered by competitors when we were children. Everything he's told your daughter about his past is designed to hide the fact that crime is literally in his blood. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Cassius lied about his identity, but his entire family history was connected to the art world that had become my daughter's greatest vulnerability. As I sat in that sterile hospital room, staring at a woman who might be my salvation or my destruction, I realized that the next 24 hours would determine whether my family survived or became another casualty in a war I'd never known we were fighting. The decision crystallized in my mind with the clarity that only comes during life or death moments. I stood up from the hospital chair, my architect's brain already calculating angles and possibilities. I'll help you, I told Evangeline, but I need guarantees about my daughter's safety. The only guarantee I can give you is that doing nothing guarantees her death. Evangeline's brutal honesty cut through any remaining illusions I might have harbored about simple solutions. 2 hours later, I sat in my penthouse living room watching Cassius Marcus help Delphine prepare dinner. Knowing that FBI agents were positioned in 3 adjacent buildings and that every word spoken in my home was being recorded, Evangeline had kept her promise about federal involvement. But seeing armed agents treat my sanctuary like a crime scene felt like watching my life being dissected by strangers.
Mom, you seem tense tonight, Delphine observed as she chopped vegetables with the precision she'd inherited from me. Is everything all right? Before I could answer, Marcus looked up from the wine he was opening, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, fear, the expression of a man who suddenly understood that his carefully constructed world was collapsing. Rosalind, he said quietly, setting down the wine bottle. How long have you known? Delphine's knife stopped moving. Known what? Marcus met my eyes across the kitchen island, and I saw the foster child he'd once been alongside the criminal he'd become. About Meridian Fine Arts, about Marcus Delacroix, about everything.
The silence that followed felt infinite. Then Delphine turned to look at me, her face cycling through confusion, understanding, and finally, a bone-deep exhaustion that made her look older than her 26 years. "You're not Cassius Vale," she said. And it wasn't a question. "No." His voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, Delphine. I'm so incredibly sorry." What happened next would be discussed in FBI briefings for months afterward. Marcus's cooperation led to the arrest of 17 people involved in an international art theft ring. Evangeline's inside information helped recover stolen artwork worth over $40 million. My penthouse became evidence in a federal case that would reshape how law enforcement approached white-collar crime networks. But none of those victories mattered as much as watching my daughter process the final, devastating truth about the man she'd loved. 6 weeks later, Marcus was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison with the possibility of early release for continued cooperation. Delphine attended the sentencing, sitting in the back row of the courtroom like a ghost of the person she'd been before, learning that everything she'd believed about love was built on lies within lies. The last time I saw Marcus, he was being led away in handcuffs, but he turned back to mouth 2 words to my daughter: "I'm sorry." Delphine never responded, but I saw her hand move unconsciously to cover her heart, and I knew that some wounds would take years to heal, if they ever did.